Stigmata. It sounds unbelievable, but it has really existed. In the early 20th century, an Italian cleric called Padre Pio began to bleed and to exhibit the wounds of Christ on the cross. Within months, he was a global religious celebrity. But how do we explain his wounds? Is it religious or supernatural? Or was it all a hoax? So, what is stigmata?
It's a phenomenon that has been around for a very long time. Stigmata traditionally is for someone to develop or claim to have developed the wounds of Jesus. Christ's 2 hands were wounded and his feet were wounded, and a soldier put a spear in his side. And of course also he had the crown of thorns on, with blood dripping from those wounds.
And they're actually bleeding wounds. These are true wounds. Here's the question: what caused the wounds?
Within religious circles, the devout believe in the divine nature of stigmata.
The stigmata are essentially caused by heavenly beings. They signify that the person is a follower of Christ, and they are designed to lead people to Christ.
One can say, well, the wounds are literally, they're miracles in imitation of Christ, imitatio Christi. Other people say the person suffering these wounds is delusional, and they're self-inflicted wounds, but the person may not remember inflicting the wounds because they are in the throes of a divine passion. Still other people say, oh, no. These are fake. So you can choose.
They say there have been hundreds of stigmatics. And how many are genuine, we don't know. I think the church has only approved the stigmata of St. Francis.
St. Francis, a towering figure in the Catholic Church.
The first known stigmatic that we have was St. Francis.
Even people who are skeptical, even Catholic authorities who are skeptical of stigmata, mostly believe in St. Francis.
And we're talking about the year 1200 now. And he was at first a worldly person. In fact, he wanted to be a knight and go travel on the Crusades and fight for the Holy Land.
He was a man of very pious character. He gave up all his worldly possessions and devoted himself to emulating Christ.
In the year 1224, St. Francis began to demonstrate signs of stigmata.
He wanted to go meditate up in a little mountain. And while he was up there, he had a vision of a seraph, an angel. And after this seraph left, he realized that he had the wounds of Christ on his hands, feet, and in his side.
The stigmata, according to St. Francis, was a divine intervention.
That was a message, St. Francis said, from the deity itself, from Jesus himself, saying, I am conveying to you my suffering, my physical suffering on the cross, to show that in this life, you're suffering that as well.
St. Francis' wounds are different from others. Others have maybe a pierced hole that goes right through their hands and feet. For St. Francis, the skin formed the shape of a nail. So on this side is the head of a nail, and on the other side, the nail, the point of the nail, and it's bent over.
His stigmata turned St. Francis into a celebrity of the Middle Ages.
As people realized his sanctity, crowds followed him everywhere for a while, the last couple of years of his life. They would want to touch his garments or take something that he had touched and maybe be healed, and sometimes there were a lot of healings from it.
Something so extraordinary has led to many theories. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Catholic Church had experienced some other miraculous happenings. But no one was prepared for a humble monk from southern Italy. His name was Padre Pio.
He was born in a little unknown village called Pietrelcina, but he always had the calling.
He was actually an extremely pious monk who did a lot of work with injured servicemen.
But one day, an extraordinary thing happened.
He's in the choir loft of his monastery, and he sees what he calls Misterioso personaggio, a celestial being. And Padre Pio went into a slight faint, and when he woke up, he had the visible wounds of Christ.
Word soon spread about the bleeding wounds of Christ.
So the next thing you know, people in the local communities start hearing about Padre Pio has a stigmata, and they start making trips up to the monastery.
But now we're in the age of burgeoning mass media. And so Padre Pio becomes the embodiment of the stigmata, and people around the world know of this person, and there's a lot of renewed devotion, because here's a person, a padre, saying that just like St. Francis, I too was afflicted by the wounds of Christ.
During his lifetime, he bore those wounds, and he used that pain to pray for people, and that's how a lot of these miracles happened. He offered these pains up to pray for people's cures. And he wrote later that Christ told him that you were going to bear these wounds for 50 years. And that's exactly what happened.
But did it really happen? How can science explain the appearance of stigmata out of the blue? By the 1930s, Italian monk Padre Pio was an international religious celebrity wherever he went. People wanted to see the man with the wounds of Christ.
He was humble and quiet. He did not try to seek attention. He couldn't help it. He would yell at people sometimes. They would try to rip his garment, and he would yell at people, keep away from me. So he tried to keep it low profile, but he just couldn't do it.
The early 20th century was the beginning of the age of science. Einstein, Planck, what did the church need? Devotees. Along comes Padre Pio. He was the walking poster boy for the Catholic Church, because he's saying, look, it's real. You guys have your science, you can have your radio, you can have your quantum physics, but look what I have. Proof that the wounds of Jesus Christ are real. They just suddenly appeared.
When Christ was crucified, it wasn't a tiny little nail. It was a big, giant nail. And Padre Pio's wounds, people could press their fingers on each side of his hand and would go right through to the other side. And some people said you could see light coming through these wounds.
But for every believer, there was a detractor.
There were allegations that he faked it, that he used carbolic acid on his hands to create wounds. He developed the idea of these fingerless gloves that he would wear that concealed his stigmata, so he looked very modest. He wasn't showing them off. What I think he was actually doing was he found a way that if he wore these gloves, that people would just imagine the stigmata was showing underneath the glove, but in fact, he didn't have to have the stigmata at all.
And nowhere was there more suspicion than in Rome.
Eventually, the Vatican ordered doctors to check him out. The first doctor said that I can't find a natural explanation for them. But the second doctor, Dr. Bignami, was an atheist, and he said, oh, these are caused by pathology and neurosis or whatever, and he's probably putting chemicals on them to maintain them. He had the monks seal the wounds up for 8 straight days. Well, at the end of 8 days, they were just as bad as they were in the beginning. In fact, even more bloody. So it kind of disproved the idea that he was putting substances on them.
Now people are saying, look, we never saw the wounds appear. We only saw him appear with the wounds. There's no motion picture film. There's nothing but his word. So you either take his word as a matter of faith, or you say, he did it himself. You choose.